Hello, everyone. My name is Adrianos Efthymiadis. I am Associate Curator at Arts, Letters, and Numbers, and I want to welcome you all today to a conversation between Fırat Erdim, Paula Matthusen, Olivia Valentine, Tim Ingold, and Leah Calminson. Today marks just 3 days short of a month worth of Loom Harp cycle. An installation which is also comprised of a total of 6 performances, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Fırat, 5 out of which have already passed, including today's performance, which just concluded about an hour ago, and one upcoming. What's that?
Yeah, one more, I think. Yeah.
Right, and then the final one on the 14th of October, correct? 14th of October is the final performance. So Loom Harp, and in consequence, these performances were and are held at the Anderson Gallery at Drake University in Des Moines, along with its respective exhibition, which catalogs traces of these performances through a series of audiovisual artifacts. We were very, very happy to have you all here as part of our exhibition at the Italian Virtual Pavilion, 17th Architecture Venice Biennale, titled Sunship, the Arc That Makes the Flood Possible. And I'll pass it on to Leah, who will be moderating today's event.
Thank you, Adrianos.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, everyone, for being here. So I'm excited to get this started. My name is Leah Calminson, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Philosophy and Religion at the University of North Texas. And as we just heard, I'm here with the artists Fırat Erdim, Olivia Valentine, and Paula Matheson, and the anthropologist and scholar Tim Ingold, who composed the essay that accompanies this show. We will start off today with a round of introductions and then have some opening remarks to help orient us all to the details of the installation and the project. After that, I will hand it off to the panelists for discussion, and I will be on hand to help us wrap up in about an hour. At any time during the discussion, if anyone here attending today has questions, please just put those in the chat, and we will do our best to take them all in the order that they're coming in. And at that point, you'd be welcome to turn on your own mic if you'd like to elaborate on your question out loud and join in the Q&A. So now I will get us started with the introductions, and we'll just go in alphabetical order. So that's starting with Fırat, and then Tim, Paula, and Olivia. And Fırat, I will hand it to you now.
Okay, thanks, Leah. Hi, everybody. I'm Fırat Erdim, and I'm from Izmir, Turkey, and I teach architecture, architectural drawing, architectural making at Iowa State University. And let's see, I'm mostly a visual artist, working in relation to architecture most of the time, doing things, the things that I make, the things that I draw are sort of seek to question architectural assumptions about axioms about how we imagine architecture, and how we go about making it. So yeah, most of the things I do are visual, and actually it's rooted in, my practice is really rooted in drawing, I think. So I've been working on sound for the past few years, thanks to collaboration with Paula Matheson. We've been working with a project called Kite Choir, making musical instruments that are operated with kites. And so that's been my introduction to sound. And then from there, through that collaboration, coming to this project where the component that I've worked on mainly and that I operate is the what we call a walking harp, which is in the back there, and that's essentially a double aeolian harp, 2 aeolian harps on either side, and it uses steel ribbons as well as strings, so that just the air pressure of walking is enough to activate the aeolian harp sound. So it becomes just as in a sense, it's similar to the kite choir. That's a practice of attunement with the atmosphere. This is a way of, in a sense, roaming through the thickness of the atmosphere, through the thickness of the air. So next.
I can jump in with the order prescribed. I am Paula Matthusen. I am professor of music at Wesleyan University. I'm joining you today from Knoxville, Tennessee, where I'm artist in residence at Log Haven. And I was really delighted to be a part of this, in part because, as Fırat alluded to, we had developed a fairly idiosyncratic sound practice working with the kite choir. And in addition to that, then I've also developed a sound practice working alongside Olivia Valentine for Between Systems and Grounds. So there's this kind of V that we have in terms of our practices. And so then it was making it a triangle, so that like we're all kind of speaking with each other and doing that really through the room. And kind of, you know, my work in a lot of ways plays with disruptions in conceptions of space, and has a lot of, and also kind of deals with resonances, feedback, and all these sort of issues that come up, and that I think you see overlap in all of our work in their own particular manifestations. So I'm really excited to talk with you all about it today, and thank you for having us here.
Oh, my next now. And so I'm Olivia Valentine. I am also a visual artist. I work mostly in things that I would ultimately call drawing, which take the place through traditional drawing materials, photography, and then textile construction. I've been working in textile construction, sometimes at an architectural scale, for over 10 years now. And so the loom is very much one of my homes, though not always my standard one. Paula and I have been working together through a project called Between Systems and Grounds for about 5 years now, which became sort of housed inside of my computer-controlled hand loom a couple of years back. And we started making some transitions with the pandemic to be able to do that remotely, which I think has informed actually a lot of the practices that we've been sort of using in this series of performances and installation, and how those are working. For us, it started, you know, like, how can we do this? Sharing space, sharing time together across different spaces, right? And through the internet. And so that feels like an origin point here. So the loom is here. It's been a part of my studio since maybe 2017. It's a AVL CompuDavi 16 harness loom that is controlled by computer software, but then operated by my hands. And Paula and I developed software to help assist that. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but it listens and then creates files that get interpreted into weaving structures over time. And so that's a little bit about me. I feel like here in this show, very much the interior space has become my domain.
And I guess it's now my turn. My name is Tim Ingold. I'm speaking here from my home in Aberdeen, in northeastern Scotland. I'm now retired, but until 2018, I was professor of social anthropology here at the University of Aberdeen. I moved to Scotland in 1999, and since I've been here, I've been developing a program looking at the relations across anthropology, archaeology, art, and architecture. And first of all, it got me interested in lines, and it's probably the reason why I'm here now, because it suddenly dawned on me at some point that that the whole of anthropology, and indeed social science, might be different if we imagined that life was not lived at points or in places, but actually along paths or along lines. I got interested in this, first of all, because I was interested in the relationship between writing and musical notation and how they come to become distinguished from one another. But then I found that there was a much bigger field there, looking at just what the relations are between writing, drawing, storytelling, weaving, knitting, all these different things that take place along lines of one kind or another. And that then has led into a much broader set of interests in looking at, as I said, the relation between anthropology, art and architecture, and design, and a bit of archaeology in there as well. And even kite flying. I was teaching a course in Aberdeen on what was called the 4 A's, anthropology, archaeology, art and architecture, And one of the things we got students to do was to make their own kites and go out and fly them, and use that as a way to try and investigate and understand the relationship between human movement and wind and sound and the ground and all these other things. And it was a very effective thing to do. So when Fırat got in touch with me some time ago and said that he had been doing this work with the Aeolian harp, I was quite excited about it, because I love kites too. And in fact, I should say that just yesterday, I was with a bunch of colleagues from the department, and we were flying a kite over Aberdeen Harbour, taking aerial photos with it. So, so there we are. There are kites in our system too. But weaving and the loom has been in there too. And I was naturally fascinated by this project when I first heard about it, because of the way in, well how comparing the kite and the loom involved different ways of working with threads and different kinds of lines. So that was what excited me about it. But I must say that one of the most pleasant things about the last few years has been the way in which all kinds of people interested in arts and architecture have suddenly asked me to do things in relation to exhibitions or installations of one sort and another, and it's great for having new ideas. So I really appreciated this opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for the introductions, everybody. And I do know, I think Fırat might have some pictures to share here. I'm going to hand it back over to Fırat, Olivia, and Paula at this point to give us some more details about sort of the actual installation and the ongoing project and the performances.
Yeah, I can, I'll give some context, and we have some images to share. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, let me do this first. Oops. That's very fast. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So so this is when Julia Franklin had asked us to come consider doing an exhibition here, and so we were visiting the gallery. Of course, we had seen it before. We'd come to exhibitions here before, but we wanted to visit and see what we could do with these ideas, with these different practices of the kite choir and the between systems and grounds, how we could kind of have those things meet. And seeing this space as sort of this blank way, its starkness and its kind of hermetic quality, both acoustically and visually, was really striking. And we realized, I didn't, even though I'd seen it before, I didn't realize that, from the outside, it's occupying this bottom level of the Harman Fine Arts building at Drake University, and so as you can probably tell, it looks filled in. So and this is the case. This gallery was created in 1996 by filling in what was an open colonnade. So this is the eastern side of it, and this is the western side of it. And you can see here from a perspective from when this is, I think Ben Wies's office was designing it. Here's the rendering of it with the open colonnade going along that entire bar. Now, what's not shown in this image is this situation. This is when the building was built. Sorry for the really grainy photograph, but this is from the Drake archives. You can see houses all around it, and even in this sort of funny S shape that it has, there are a couple of houses there behind it, front. So this is during the sort of post-World War II expansion of the Drake campus into this neighborhood. And this building is functioning sort of instrumentally within that. And the colonnade was there in part to, I think, allow vision and passage through the neighborhood, even though those houses were there. So here's I
believe that was a negotiation actually with the homeowners who refused to give up their properties, was that they would still have a vision line through the campus, or through the building. And so that was this space. This was open to allow vision through the neighborhood.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to point out that to see this expansion and what was happening in this neighborhood, in part as a result of the redlining of the neighborhood during the 1930s, not a lot of it for racial reasons. That this neighborhood of primarily black and brown communities, weren't able to get mortgages or loans for their property. Yeah. So yeah, and you can see in plan here essentially where the gallery is situated along that bar and how it fills that colonnade. So just how this opacity is created is I think significant in this case.
Okay, so here we have now, or very recently, the outside of the gallery, where we've taken actually all of the interior elements that we've placed here in the space and drawn them on the outside of the space as an attempt to start to think about maybe bringing some of that transparency back, right? We still have an interior space, but bringing these interior elements that we've brought in, the loom, the harp, the speakers, and a few of the sort of space configuring walls, movable walls. Everything in here is mobile. None of it is sort of permanent architectural spaces, as well as this fabric demarcated that I've been making over the course of the exhibition in pink here. And so this is actually where we're sitting now.
Where we are. Yeah. Should we talk about the walls?
Sure.
So as you can see here, we tried not to treat the wall as for the most part, as a place to hang completed artworks, let's say. So on one wall, there's the concrete benches that are just immediately on the outside, and let me see if on the other wall are actually the architectural openings, doors, windows, so on, that are across the street and across the parking lot on the eastern side.
Yeah, so about a block and a half away of the remaining residential infrastructure in the neighborhood.
Yeah. This is how those drawings.
Yeah, so here you can see the three houses that happen to fall within the sort of view path of the gallery space that are on. We're located on 26th Street. There's a parking lot that takes up about one block, and then this is looking across to 24th Street.
And this building, this edge is really the eastern edge of the Drake campus. Some more. And so during the live performances, the harp goes outside and roams in and around the remaining colonnade and in the neighborhood.
You and
yeah.
the harp.
Me and the harp, yeah. And so the sound from the room is being broadcast as well from the backpack there. And then the sound of the harp is also being broadcast back to a set of very complicated connections online, and somehow ending up at the room. And we're working with all of Paula can talk about the sound components of it, but here are just some pictures of that.
And then this is me inside of this space simultaneously while Fırat is exploring the neighborhood outside. I am inside with my loom, which is listening to the room. Paula is also very much present, at least for me, virtually. And we have a few audio connections that happen both between Paula and I, and then between Fırat and Paula during these live performance moments. So my laptop is here listening to what's happening, and then interpreting those sounds into weaving patterns that I'm actually working with a bit of a delay on those. We build them up and then I weave them, and then as I'm weaving, it's still listening, developing the next file, which I think that sense actually of latency or lag time is ubiquitous throughout the project. It was something that is, I think we all understand it to be inherent with the internet, and is something that we've embraced with the project more so than not. Here with a class of students from Drake, a drawing class, who've spent a lot of time actually listening and spending time with the work. over the course of the exhibition.
I think that's it.
Paula, maybe do you want to talk a bit more about this?
Sure. Yeah, if you want me to jump in about sound at all, which has been really intriguing to think about because there are some particular challenges to this, I think. And so what's in terms of what's discrete, what's continuous, and then sort of blending all these things when in terms of networking that room. But starting with a basic idea, I think, of having this kind of perforation between inside and out. And so there's a lot of that is retained through the way that the sound enters in that, which is one that there's microphones outside when Fırat's walking outside too. So that way, not only is the sound being broadcast from the harp, but also then like there's ambient sounds and the sort of environmental sounds that come into that as well. And so like today, if you're able to hear some of it as well, like there's a brass band playing outside. And so some of that filtered in as well. And so it's nice because then it feels very indexical to what that specific moment is in terms of when we're doing this. And then, and so a lot of that feels kind of instantaneous in a way, but then in terms of the work that we've been doing between systems and ground, and that's happening with the Loom, a lot of that kind of is happening both real time, but then also like you have this kind of slowly building artifact. And so some of that gets manifested through the process of making these files. And so everything kind of how I was approaching the sound for this too was one was to avoid sort of a kind of normative speaker placement, which was thanks to Fırat and Olivia, like was able to get placed in the space and designed such that there's no sort of PA where you receive sound and things like that. It becomes about sound moving across the space. And then so this idea being that something could come from outside and go and then get to the other side and sort of also stay there and linger in the space as well. And so there's this sort of planks of speakers and there's speakers sitting up on like behind the wall there too, and sort of parts of the ceiling. And so those are playing a bit. And there's kind of an accumulation that happens as well. So to me, what it sounds like is a bunch of really oddly sized crickets at the end of the day. There is just sort of this sense of kind of making it into an ecosystem where like you don't necessarily have to understand all of what's happening in it, but hopefully there's enough sense of hearing something that kind of connects to something else so that it feels like it's tethered somehow, even if it is somewhat oblique in terms of what that full-on relationship is. It's not always one-to-one. And part of that too is just kind of the frequencies where things sit. So like the harp is very, very low. And then like as a result, a lot of the tones that are running, there are actual transducers on the Loom too. So the Loom is also sounding. The Loom also has microphones on it. So the Loom itself is like listening and then playing back. And so those are a lot of high tones. So like sort of stuff. and then in between that is a lot of sort of environmental. And I will spare you any further a cappella renderings of the sound installation, but hopefully that gives you some of an idea of what I was thinking about. And I'm certainly happy to answer more specific questions on that.
Excellent, wonderful. Well, I'm gonna turn it over to you all again for further discussion, and just remind everyone in the audience at this point again that we will try to moderate the questions in the chat. So put them in there as they come in, and we're happy to have people turn their mics on and join in at a certain point when we get to your question. But back to you, Fırat.
Oh, I was going to ask Tim. Do you want to mention some of the insights that you were having about the essay?
Well, I thought I could, or I could try. I mean, when you see that gallery, like which is behind your heads at the moment in the picture, I mean, what you see are flat surfaces and straight lines, boxes. Everything is cuboid, and most people would probably say, "Oh, that's the architecture of the building, right? It's all straight surfaces, boxes, and the rest of it." They wouldn't come to think that actually there's air. Both inside and outside, or that air is swirling around and making all sorts of formations that are otherwise invisible. So I started from the point of how could we turn this around and say that let's pretend that the building is actually made of air. Let's say that the bit we can see is just a kind of exoskeleton, and that the real architecture is actually the air that's both inside and outside the building, and how we could follow that. And so I was thinking how could we imagine it? We could imagine that we were like a fly that buzzes around and then somehow managed to get inside and was experiencing that. But then I also thought, because I've been reading about the experience of people who are visually impaired and are depending more on hearing and touch than perhaps most of us with functioning vision do. And one thing is that for them, the distinction between hearing and touch is not so obvious as it is for us, or I should say for us, for sighted people. But for another thing, that their apprehension of surfaces is quite different. So when you come up against the wall, like the flat wall of that gallery there, looks absolutely homogeneous, flat, basic, hard. If you can't see it, you feel it in terms of changing textures and thicknesses of the air and the sorts of vibrations that are set up. And blind people talk about how if they come near to a wall, they say, oh, they need to put their hand up because they can feel through the pressure, and they can sometimes hear it too, the sort of pressure on the face. So what they're picking up are very subtle variations in the density and also perhaps currents of air inside the building, which most of us would completely, well, probably we do notice them, but we don't realize that we notice them or pay any particular attention to them. So then I thought that this is what in a sense this is what this is about. And if we took that, what if we thought of the walls of the gallery in the way a fly or a visually impaired person would do? Or to use other examples, if you are a worm living in a vegetable bed, how you would think of the box in a box, what you'd think of the walls of the box, or if you were a fish in a tank, how would you think about the walls of the tank? Again, it's a bit the same, that you wouldn't apprehend them as these solid surfaces, but as something that is visible only or apprehendable only through these variations of pressure. And then I thought, okay, so we can bring in the harp and the loom as instruments for investigating this, in which we can turn the wall from this solid surface into something more like a membrane that's serving as a transducer between the inside and the outside. And then obviously, if it's a transducer, you can sort of see an echo of what's on the inside on the outside, and you can see an echo of what's on the outside on the inside, exactly as you've done it on the walls of this building. And then I wanted to look at the form of the harp and the loom. And what's interesting about both of them is that they combine straight lines, which are the taut threads, the warp threads of the loom, or the string, the taut string of the harp, and wavy lines, loose wavy lines, that is the weft thread on the loom. But in the case of the harp, the amazing formations of air that are formed as the air moves across the line of the string as Fırat is walking along, which actually it's those eddies of air that create the vibrations that make the sound. And so with the loom, you have multiple straight strings at the same time. With the harp, you have one straight string that multiple times. And I figured that actually gives us the solution to the problem of how to understand the architecture of the building, because it's all about how you put together a structure that is made out of straight lines, which is the one you can see, and the other complement, which is all movement and flow and currents and eddies, and you put the two together and allow them to communicate with one another. So that's how I interpreted it all. I don't know whether I got it right, but I hope so.
I really enjoy that insight, and I've been thinking about it since I read it. As we've been going out and walking around, and during the performances. I think I think part of the experience of it is also is a sort of a connection with an elsewhere, so that helps to sort of like the place that you're at is not just the place that you're at, but it's in a sense you're jumping over those boundaries. I mean, that's what it feels like to be performing it, or enacting it somehow. Yeah, I mean, so in a strange way, with the harp, I can say that the air becomes a solid. So when you're walking, it's like as if you're walking against this resistance. Then you can really hear it, and it becomes really palpable that way, like walking through a solid. So instead of just the walls being a solid, the air becomes a kind of solid that one is walking through. And that's something that shift in perception. I thinking about the worm in the soil, in the gardening soil, like that, the edge of the box doesn't really matter. You're still living in soil. You're still in that medium. That it becomes, to me, that's an instrument. That's a kind of apparatus to help make that shift happen.
That's exactly it. And again, going back to the visually impaired people, they also talk about how they feel the thickness of the air sometimes. They use exactly that same metaphor, and that was so fascinating, because it's also a sonic experience as well.
I'm wondering if I might actually throw in a question here to Paula, just briefly. I'm curious, having learned a little bit more actually here today with you all about the technical details of the show. What are you doing with some of the sound content after the fact? I've heard some of the recordings that have been put together. Are you using that in a composite? Are you creating compositions from some of this content?
Well, it's an interesting question in that, like, I think there's part of the question here too, where we, like, if we recognize that, airborne sound relies on air, and it's there for, to have compressions and refractions, right? Like, we need some disturbance of a medium, and then that's what registers for us. It's like sound that we perceive through our auditory nerve, et cetera. And then we pump those back out through, speakers a lot of the times, or other things that then are creating those disturbances. What's interesting, there's the work, I think it was Gordon Monahan who said, like, if we could see sound, we would understand automatically that it is a physical element. And then, like, that kind of thing of, like, sort of feeling that, and then sort of thinking about it in some ways, like, one of the questions I'm thinking about in this a lot is, like, why performance, right? Like, because it's not just that sound is physical, it's then that, like, there's specifically a durational element that is entering into this, and that we're choosing to enter it together. And that there's something about doing this and saying, like, okay, from this time to this time on this specific date, you can hear all of us being here and engaging with what's happening here, going out to another space, then, like, someone's outside, then there's all these other people outside who kind of come in, like, sort of, and then it creates this possibility for intersections. And there's part of that is that by choosing to engage with sound, and this is my bias, but by choosing to engage with sound, like, we are engaging in some ways differently. And I think that there's something to me really interesting about the practices. And in part of this is my history of working with Fırat and Olivia on two separate projects, is that, like, there's an interesting way of bringing sound into those practices, and then now bringing them in a way to try and speak together. Because for us, what I, like, associate a lot with it is continuous sound. There's a, outside, sort of peripatetic. And for Olivia's, a lot of what I associate is sort of the bit by bit movement. And that what you have, though, is, like, this accumulation that comes through that. And so part of trying to figure out the technical details of this is, like, what does it mean to have these sort of things kind of then all come into one space, and that we're engaging with it at these specific times and durations. And so, like, none of it is for us to perform for you per se, and, like, have it be this, like, thing that's going to get tons of ratings, 14 Rotten Tomatoes, and, like, mad applause everywhere. It's something to be like, okay, like, you can drop in and listen on this at once. And, like, in a way, it implicates so many people in the performance, because, like, this room is crazy. Like, it has all this strange history that you can't deny. And when I was talking to Fırat about it, it took me the longest time to understand that, like, those weren't windows in the colonnade. Like, the idea of it being, like, this space that was just closed off like a dungeon suddenly was bizarre. So, like, And I just realized all these assumptions that I made about that space in particular, because I didn't know the history. And so then to sort of have that then brought into it, and then have those manifestations brought upon the wall, I think too, also means that we're seeing things that like a lot of times which we don't associate with sound, but are still there, which is like trace, right? Like, and all these other sort of things that like, and I think that that touches on Professor Ingold's writing beautifully too, is in this idea of trace, but like that, like sound also will disturb things through things like Chladni plates and stuff like that as well, because sound is physical, but it also is something that we're so sloppy at talking about and finding ways to sort of describe, because that's what it is, a sloppy signifier.
Hearing Paula and Fırat talk about their experiences of this situation, I am thinking about my own, and mine is not necessarily about the air, but more so about time. And you know, as I mentioned previously, Paula and I have had this kind of communication since the pandemic. But it wasn't actually until it was in this context and through these processes that I became really aware that I was hearing the near future in my ear. And then actually, just as I'm talking today, I realize I'm also then weaving the near past on my loom. So I am existing in this place that's like actually not like it's kind of in the present, but it's in the present only in that I'm listening to the future and I'm sort of dealing with what already happened. Like auditorially, I can hear part of what is happening in Paula's space. I hear it in my ear, but not in the space. And then a few seconds later, I hear it come through the speaker. And then as I'm weaving, that's all happened maybe 15-20 minutes ago with the current interval that I'm working at with the weave files that I'm developing. And so I'm kind of straddling that in the same way I think that like we're straddling space, we're straddling air, and communicating across things. So that's been kind of my take or my experience of this environment. I think also,
sorry, I think the philosopher Erin Manning once said something about how she was writing about dance and saying that you experience the present as the future's past, which is just more or less exactly what you were saying. But it also says something about time, because I agree with Paula that the way we talk about sound is all one incredible muddle. And rather than just saying, well, it's a sloppy signifier, I want to sort this muddle out and try and figure out the different ways in which people are talking about sound, so that an engineer, an acoustic engineer, who's concerned with the properties of physical vibration in the medium, will tell you without a shadow of doubt, sound is vibration in the medium, and it happens with different kinds of frequencies. That, he says, what he or she will say, that is what sound is. But and so if, for example, you heard a rumble of thunder, you say, okay, the thunder, what you're hearing then was sound transmitted from this source, which is the mass of air collapsing, to your ear. But when you say you heard thunder, just as physically, just as viscerally, you're talking about a sound that carries on in time. And you'd say, and if you ask how long did the thunder last, it would be the duration of the roll, not the time it took for the sound to travel from the source to your ear. So there's a complete mix-up between thinking of sound as a transmitted signal from a source to a recipient, and thinking of sound as an affectation in the medium and in your own consciousness that carries on for a certain length of time, for as long as the thunder's rolling or whatever it might be. And well, anyway, I just wanted to make that point, because I think we have the same problem when we talk about light. When physicists talk about light, they mean an electromagnetic ray or transmission of one sort and another. But we might talk about a candle flame, which is burning for a period of time. And we're always mixing these things up. So I think in this installation, when we're talking about time, we're talking about not the time it takes for sound to travel from A to B at the speed of sound. We're talking about the time it takes whilst this sound is being created. And that's something that exists only because we're also hearing it. So it's not just physical, it's phenomenological. anyway, that's just a meditation on that point.
Yeah, no, and that feels, well, that feels accurate to me. I think also Paula mentioned a little bit about this idea of a performance versus maybe just coming together. And this is, I think, extended into the ideas about time, but that I mean, I've always been very hesitant as somebody who's mainly a visual artist and is relatively private about studio practice to do things that might be called a performance, that might have an audience, that may, you know, we may sit down and, you know, we'll start a performance and people will be in their seats and they will listen intently until we are done, and then we get up and bow and, you know, or what have you. But the idea of coming together at a set time to do things together and potentially implicate all of these other spaces, places, people. It actually makes me curious for Fırat's experience then, because you are the sort of meandering external component of this, actually what your interactions on the street and in the neighborhood have been, if there have been any.
Yeah, lots. And yeah, I mean, there's a whole negotiation with, the harp is as wide as the sidewalk. So, you know, you have to negotiate with people and so on. And that's a part of it, but I'm glad that at least there's sound that's coming out, and the sound of the room often sounds like some kind of sensory device, like some sort of, you know, it's trying to hear, you know. So the sound of the harp outside, it seems more like it's more like something that's trying to hear, like antenna, you know, rather than as like a musical instrument. So I think people, you know, is this person playing or are they listening? That's often the question that seems to be coming, which is perfect. That's how I would want it to be. Yeah.
It's a bit like, I think, because the harp only plays harmonics, right? Yeah. So, and so when I was thinking, well, I didn't get it into this essay, but I've always been puzzled by, because I play the cello, right? And so you can play harmonics on the cello simply by touching your finger halfway down, or a third of the way down, or a quarter way down the string, and it creates a standing wave. But the sound you get is completely different from the kind of sound you get when you stop the string. And I'm still trying to puzzle as to what that difference is, but it's a little bit the same with the harp. I mean, if you actually got an ordinary harp and you're playing it, you're plucking the string, you get a twang, because the sound is actually being created by the vibration of the string. But with your harp, and I was listening to some other harps, and you also had recordings, you get this whistle or hum, or however you want to describe it, but it's a sort of airy, ethereal sound, which doesn't have a vibrational quality to it that, say, an ordinary stop string instrument would have, or if you're playing a guitar. And I'm still can't quite work it out as to why that happens or how that happens.
I don't know. I can't. I don't quite understand it, but I don't know. Sometimes I feel like this harp has a temper.
I feel the same about my cello often.
Yeah.
It's usually in a bad mood. Sometimes it's in a good mood.
This one's in a bad mood for sure. But yeah, so I mean, well, no, walking around, it's I think, you know, this installations exhibition isn't really about like putting out something that is like a finished works of art or finished. It sets the stage for a period of time, right? That we're kind of exploring these components, and also each performance we're trying some different things, which I think sometimes leads to failure, you know, technical failures. But I think I hope that you know. So it's been a period of time to try and understand and explore this space inside and outside, and I think, you know, there's something to it that's also. Tim, you've mentioned at some point I think some of you are writing this relationship between the affective and the cosmic, and the joining of the two. I don't know if I'm correct in thinking this way, but there's a kind of I draw a link between that kind of threshold and let's say like an inside out, the sense of an inside outside as well.
But the thing is that there are two different ways of thinking about inside outside, and perhaps the conventional way that people might think about it is a simple division. You're dividing a space. So there's one side and there's the other side, or there's a sense which is more like breathing in and out. You know, where you say, well, you can't really, instead of using a container metaphor, when something is either inside the container or outside it, if you think of the human body, for example, and you say, well, what's inside and what's outside the human body? It's really impossible to say, because it's actually a very complicated folded structure. And you say, okay, you breathe in, somehow in some sense the air is inside the body, but in another sense it isn't, because the air is just inhabiting all these cracks and folds and so on. And so it's giving out, it's giving in and out. And it means that the walls of the gallery become something a bit more like, I don't know, the skin of a bellows or of a bagpipe, which is much more permeable and flexible. And that's what I thought. I just wanted to ask one question, if I might, and that is the bits of the walls of the gallery that were filled in and were once open. What is the material? I mean, from the outside, it looks kind of grey. Is it concrete or what is it?
Slate.
It's slate.
Yeah. I think they were trying to make it look like shadow, you know, and differentiate it from the building.
Yeah, so it's
like
slate, and then there's actually a rather large cavity, at least on this side of the gallery.
It's a plenum of air. Yeah.
So there's a rather large air pocket in there, and then the wallboard on this side, and I believe it's thinner on their side.
Okay, so there's a slate, then there's a gap of air, and then there's board of some kind, whatever it is.
Yeah, gypsum board.
Gypsum. Okay.
It's a very absorbent sound-wise. It's like there's no echo of any sort. Like,
yeah. I've spent actually quite a bit of time in here, and it's really it's a little bit challenging to be in here, because there isn't any relationship to the outside, but then it's also like, you know, you're kind of standing directly on the concrete with just one layer of carpet over it. Like we've pulled it up in where the wood is right there for the mounting for the bloom, that it's just pulled up to the concrete, and it's the same concrete that's outside.
Yeah. Not the sort of room you'd want to live in.
No.
I'll direct y'all's attention right now. There are a few questions in the chat that do relate perhaps to some of the conversation you're having right now. These came in from the YouTube live stream, but one here has to do, I'll take you back up to the first one that came in. I have one question on the placement of the speakers in the room where the installation is in. I listened to the performance online, and reverberation as a result of the interior was lost. Does the room use reverberation intentionally as a mechanism to double or unfold itself?
I might be able to answer some of that, which is yes. But, so they're depending on the configuration of the microphones at the time, you might get more of a sense of the room in the live feed. But at its basic kind of like ground level configuration, it's orchestrated such that like kind of there is a certain amount of low range that is up behind, like sort of up on the top of the wall underneath those sort of pockets on the ceiling. And those actually add like a fair bit of reverberance on the low end. And it also means that it's like, you can tell a little bit where it's coming from, but not as exactly as you can with the other speakers, which, because they have higher frequency content, become much more easy to localize in the room. And so in that case too, then you start to hear the panning a bit more as things move across the room. And then the lower frequencies in some ways are sort of filling that in, and then playing with those sort of pocket resonances. And then the other ones, which are sort of, they're sort of bare speaker cones on angled essentially. So they do get some reflection from the wall. But I had my inclination, given the sort of dryness of the space and the length of it, was to use a lot in the way of breaking the sound up using granular synthesis or a handful of low frequency oscillators so that you could hear the pulsation travel across the room and hopefully get a little bit of reflection as well as it moved.
There's a second question here that I think actually scales up the first question, maybe for Paula as well. And I think this might have to do with the fact that this performance kind of resides in multiple cities, right? The question is, how does this mechanism of transferring motion and sound work at a larger scale, like in a city or between cities? How do you choose the context of these two sound connected spaces?
Through a lot of really connected, really complicated web streams. Yeah, it's so there's a practice that like Olivia and I developed for between systems and grounds, which was like kind of really early on, like to sort of get work with clean feed and then shoutcast, and then sort of have these two things sort of operating simultaneously. And then and occasionally what we've done too is like, it was maybe 2 weeks ago that we invited Sam Welsen, who's from Des Moines originally, but now out in Los Angeles, wonderful composer performer. In that case too, he was able to connect to us over Sonobus. And so there's like a lot of kind of different technologies involved in this in terms of the streaming. But like once, you know, what's interesting about that is that like so often the assumption of these things is, right, like I think goes back to our early sort of things with telecommunications, where AT&T had that, the phone company in the States had this thing like, oh, it sounds like you're right next door. I can hear a pin drop or something like that, as if you're all kind of in the same room. And that there's so much that's kind of developed around this idea that like, the best technologies are the ones that are supposed to hide themselves and therefore like not announce their presence and become normalized in that way. However, in this case, when we're working with those things, part of it is that everyone's experience is completely different. Fırat's experience is completely different from Olivia's. I can't speak to that, but I just assume so since. And then even with sorry, you're muted.
And Sam's experience also, I think, was very different. And yeah, so the mix downs that you've done, you know, are really interesting because it's like, wow, it's like a weird merging of all of these realities, you know. Yeah.
And so even like, so, and then for Leah, for your question earlier too, which was like, is this making compositions? It's like, no, it's not. It's kind of making like a bizarre virtual thing that is an artifact of the fact that we're all making things kind of independently. And then it's like, how did that sound? You know, and then sort of putting it together. And so, you know, the idea of having a recording is in some ways a distortion of what it actually is, right? Like, because no one is having the same experience, yet we're all agreeing to share time. So there's something about that that I find really enjoyable, because it's like that game of telephone, right? Like where one person says one thing and then it gets like, you know, except in this case, we're using satellites and like a lot of streaming technology. So there's a lot that gets lost, but there's a lot of creativity, I think, that happens in the fact that like, if you lean into the latencies and lean into the distortions, they can be musical prompts and creative prompts.
I love that. There's a few questions too that just came in about the weaving. And just to let you know, we are right up. I can't believe it's gone so quickly, but we are coming right up at 3. But there's a couple of questions here about the technical details of the loom, and a question too to see if we can see the pattern of the weave.
Oh, I suppose I could pick things up and walk over, if that makes sense. But maybe it's better to chat a little bit about it first, which is that the weaving that I've been doing, that I've developed, frankly, with Paula for the past several years, I've made a number of decisions through that progression to be able to think about how I can actually relinquish a fair amount of control over the weave structure and over the patterns. And so I early on decided to use a weave structure called overshot, which is a situation where you have a woven ground that's very stable. It's a plain weave, and then you have a thread that gets shot over it, right? And so actually all the white in this weaving, you could cut it out and be left with a plain black fabric. And so the pattern there is very much supplementary. It exists on top, exists below. It is a two-sided fabric, and it's sort of oppositional in that way. And what you see in the frame right now is actually very much just a test pattern. I ran about 4 yards of weaving before we started the series of performances here, to be able to get the fabric up into the space. Essentially, I was thinking of it as header, like you would have on a film before you were shooting film, or similarly, or also probably on an audio cassette. And then I think Heather, you're also asking about the how we're coming up with the weave structure with the sound. And it's actually really quite a simple mechanism. Paula and I developed a max patch that listens. It takes the tone, Paula can correct me if I'm wrong, but it takes the tone of the room and essentially translates it into a number between 1 and 12. And then that is made into a Weaver's interchange format file, which I still have some control over. If we're a technical Weaver here, I actually control what's called the tie-up, which is how those numbers are then interpreted into lifting of the harnesses. So if we have a 1, maybe harnesses 1, 3, 7, and 10 are coming up, and that progresses. We've set it up with 12. I actually currently have it configured so that 1 and 2 are the same, 3 and 4 are the same, 5 and 6 are the same, which actually gives us a little bit more consistency in the patterning. And so I am able to actually actively change that. Even I could do it on a daily basis if I wanted to. But there are a series of patterns that we're working with. I'm making some selections, and then the computer is listening, assigning numbers, and that part is not at all controlled by me, but controlled by the sound of the room. So I hope that gives some idea. Should we pick the computer up and look a little closer? I feel like maybe we should have included some images, closer up images of the weaving, but this might be a little bit awkward. But this is at the front right now of the room, and these are all test patterns that were made early on, actually running just numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can see my finger here, thinking what those would look like together. And then coming through more recently out of the Loom, we have sort of a start of the weaving, and then the first performance, and then the subsequent time since up through up here. We have what was happening today. And there are essentially 12 stripes that are inserted in this as well, which are related in some ways to some pieces of hardware that we actually aren't using right now, but that were integrated into some of the earlier systems for the Between Systems and Grounds project. Oh, thank you, Homa. I'm glad I could share this with you.
Well, this has been fascinating. I feel like the thankless task here right now of being the moderator, my job was to keep us on time. We are right up here at 3. I'm happy to let the conversation continue longer if you all want to continue, or invite any maybe kind of concluding reflections here at the end of this conversation.
Might I ask a concluding question? And that is that I have no idea why it's called Between Systems and Grounds. What do you mean by grounds? And why the title?
Well, that's a good question. Paula, where did we come up with that?
We were looking at the rose grounds at the time, and then similarly, like grounds, right? Like you need to have grounds for audio circuits and things like that as well. So there's a certain idea, those kind of terms are things that sort of seem to overlap in their different manifestations, somewhat poetically.
Okay, because it's nothing to do with the ground. This one might imagine this sort of thing you walk on.
No, but
that's what I imagined, and so I was getting lost as to what on earth it meant. I'm sure other people will be too.
No, and when I talk about that specifically, that collaboration, I actually always introduce it, or we always introduce it as these two systems, right? Feedback-based electronic music, and in the original incarnation of that project, bobbin lace weaving, that are really disparate system. Like they're both systems of working, and they seem different. And then the grounds, both of them do have grounds very much. I was originally working with this lace structure called rose grounds. But now with this weaving, I also still very much have a sort of figure and ground. The black fabric is very much the ground fabric that then the overshot travels over. And so thinking about those two ways of thinking and bringing both of those together is really where that came from. But no, that's a good and very, very valid question.
Well, and then if you're talking about electrical signal, usually there is some sort of tethering to like the ground that you walk on as well. So there is that sort of aspect of it. But,
Thank you.
thanks for the question.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Leah, for moderating. Yeah, this has been great fun, a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, and thank you to Arts Letters Numbers for
Yes, for
hosting
making
us
this
for
possible.
this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Leah.
Thanks to everyone.
Thank you so much, you guys. Thank you for coming.
Okay.
I'm going to consider it officially over now. They can trim this part of the recording. I'll stop the pause
Thank
button.
you, everyone.
Okay.
Bye, bye, bye.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.
Bye.